Well, the government's looking at a few key measures, nothing set in stone yet, but looking at bringing forward changes that your government actually implemented, changes that were to come into play from the 1st of July, and bringing them forward so they are activated sooner. Is that enough?
Well, it's a welcome thing that the Prime Minister's got drought on his mind, but it doesn't really do anything in the absence of a more relaxed means test. See, the payment which is coming into play on July 1 only replaces the transitional payment, which was to bridge the old scheme to the new scheme. Labor hadn't yet legislated the assets test or the income, the income or assets test. So we would have done that sometime this year. Tony Abbott is yet to do it, and unless he determines a far more relaxed assets test, then bringing it forward will make it no different a payment than the transitional payment.
So where should that assets test be relaxed to, and how would that help farmers?
Well, the three things need to be done. He needs to relax the assets test, which of course takes a bit of time because it needs to be legislated. I'm offering bipartisan support, and I've said that Labor will help facilitate that through the Parliament. He needs to further enhance, in recognition of the severity of the drought, the farm finance package we put in place. That's the initiative which provides debt relief to farmers. He needs to do two things there: further reduce the interest rates, maybe also extend the term, so it's really three things, but he also needs to relax the guidelines, which he could do with a stroke of the pen, no legislation required, to make sure that all drought affected farmers have access to that scheme. Third, he needs to resurrect the COAG process. The problem, David, is that we were sort of halfway through a reform process when Labor lost office, and our first task after the election, if we'd won, would be to bring COAG back in to complete the process so that those EC schemes which were abolished were replaced with something new. Our focus was to be on some form of natural disaster relief payment. Problem is, 6 months into government, not only hasn't the government progressed the COAG reform, but indeed it has abolished the COAG vehicle. It's a thing called SCOPE, the Standing Council on Primary Industries, the COAG vehicle which is in charge of progressing that reform. So in a sense we've gone backwards. Meanwhile, by the way, Barnaby Joyce, for some bizarre reason, has taken $40 million out of the farm financing package. I don't understand that. He could spend that money tomorrow, but seems reluctant to.
One of the other measures being mooted, and maybe among those that you've offered support for, is this New Start style payment that's being talked about by Barnaby Joyce and others in the government to allow farmers to keep their employees. Is that an appropriate course of action for the government to take, although not confirmed yet?
Well, we're happy to have the discussion. I mean, jobs is the topic of the day. We've got unemployment on the rise. We've got manufacturing firms closing all over the place on Tony Abbott's watch. So anything that is designed to retain jobs, particularly in rural and regional Australia, of course, is worthy of consideration.
And what about exceptional circumstances where the government, for example, pays half the interest bill for farmers that are badly affected by drought? It doesn't come cheap. I think last time around it was about $750 million. Is the drought bad enough to trigger that?
Well, when you see farmers calling for a return to exceptional circumstances, what they are really saying is that they want to return to interest rate subsidies. There were many initiatives in exceptional circumstances, but that was the expensive one and the one farmers relied on most. The problem is that public policy bodies, including the Productivity Commission and others, have been saying for years that interest rate subsidies are a bad idea. They don't give sufficient reward to those who are working hardest at drought-proofing themselves, but they also encourage farmers to go into even more debt. But we've acknowledged the problem by creating the farm finance package. That is, the former Labor government created the farm finance package, which doesn't invite farmers to take on more debt, but rather it allows the debt of farmers, or half of the debt of farmers, or some of the debt of farmers, to be moved off the books of their commercial bank and onto the books of the Commonwealth. So we now hold the debt. We charge them 4.5% only and interest only. So on average, that could be an $80,000 per year cash flow saving to a farming family. But in recognition of the drought, we need to make that a more attractive scheme, further increase the differential between the commercial rate and our rate, and loosen the guidelines, because many of farmers are being denied access to that scheme because they're struggling to convince the bean counters, if you like, that they have ongoing viability.
Yeah. Speaking of the bean counters, Tony Abbott has said very clearly over the past couple of weeks that there's no free ride when it comes to industry on the taxpayer's back. Just explain to our viewers the case for why farmers are different to other industries around Australia.
I've said publicly many times that in terms of industry welfare, our starting position should always be no, but then sectors or firms be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. We don't have time to talk about it now, but I think a very strong case was present with both the auto industry and SPC. Farmers are very different for two reasons. One, they feed us. They offer our food security. We can't afford to have them leaving the land. Two, they are exposed like no other industry to the vagaries of the weather. And the direction of drought policy in recent years has been towards drought proofing rather than in drought assistance. And many farmers, the majority of farmers, have done an excellent job of drought proofing themselves using our farm management deposit schemes, for example. But David, you cannot prepare and be ready for a drought like this. This is a maybe one in a 50 years event, and doesn't matter how much you invest and how hard you try, you can't be prepared for this. You can't deal with it without assistance. That's why I believe some form of natural disaster payment has to come back into play in partnership with the states. That's why we need to get COAG back together, and that's why I can't understand why the government has abolished the very COAG vehicle for progressing that initiative.
Just playing devil's advocate though, can't farmers prepare in the boom times though? Because like I said at the start of this interview, droughts are a part of this nation and are really, you'd have to say, expected.
Yeah, and they do prepare. They prepare in all sorts of ways, and they often do so with the assistance of the Farm Management Deposit Scheme, which effectively, if you want to put it in its plainest terms, gives them a big tax breaks on money which is put aside or invested in order to drought-proof rather than spend that money or put it in the bank. And farmers are taking up that opportunity. But again, this is a rare event, a very severe event, and there's no way you can drought-proof. It doesn't matter how water efficient you are and how many dams you have, whatever the case might be, you can't prepare for an event as severe as this one.
Joel Fitzgibbon, thanks so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, David.